everybody, welcome to Skeptrack. Welcome to DragonCon 2019. Glad to see everybody here. I am Derek Ellington, and I've been trusted to make my own introduction, so I might just pad my resume a little bit for you guys, but no, that's okay. Again, glad to be back with you guys. I see some familiar faces out there. In the past, we have talked about things like hacking in popular culture and how to rig elections, and also investigating the millennial mind. For those of you who haven't been to one of my presentations before, I'm a digital forensics examiner, and so I'm the guy who looks at your cell phone and looks at your computer and tells everybody what you've been up to. And I see people putting their cell phones away now, so that's cool. And what we're going to talk about today may be a little bit different. We're going to talk about death. And what I've kind of come to find out when you think about death is that some people either don't think about it at all, or some people think about it way, way too much. It's one of those really interesting topics. And we're going to kind of talk about how death and digital forensics and our digital legacy kind of coincide and overlap. So we're going to go through a couple things here. So did everybody get a chance to see the cartoon? Was it up long enough? It was small? Aw, okay. Well, then I'm going to read it for you real quick, because it's got death and mouse sitting at a bar. Oh, it's big now. There we go. Okay. When I hear a chuckle, I'll know you've seen it. That's kind of how we're going to get started. Read? Oh, you're going to make me read it anyway. Okay. So it's, "What's up, Mr. Death?" And Death says, "I was supposed to meet Pig here, but he hasn't arrived yet. Hang on while I voice dial him. Call Pig. Home or mobile? Call Pig home." And then poor Pig drops dead. Perhaps I worded that poorly. Okay, so that's for a topic like death, that's kind of a good way to get started. But so let's talk about death for a minute, or 50. You know, very few people have the fortune or misfortune to kind of pick the time and the place. Most of us don't wake up in the morning thinking that today is going to be the day that I die, and plan accordingly. And again, why am I here talking about death? Well, I'll tell you a story about a lady. She was a 52-year-old lady. Her name was Christine. She was a mother of two, a very, very popular, well-known realtor in Louisiana. Wonderful, wonderful woman, a lot of things going on. It was a day in July, beautiful sunny day, and she'd had a great day. Several closings, lots of showings, things like that. She was driving home in the afternoon on Interstate 20, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And she was actually talking on the phone with one of her coworkers. They were having a conversation about how great the day was. And I mean, just couldn't be brighter. She was so happy. She was driving an almost brand new, beautiful red Mercedes C-Class sports car. Her daughter had gotten married about a month before. And she's driving along, talking to her coworker, talking to him about, you know, the wonderful day they had and how things were going. And when she got up that morning, she probably did not plan for the tractor trailer truck in the other lane to change lanes without looking. A guy who shouldn't have had a license anyway, it should have already had his license revoked. When he changed lanes without looking, the front of his car hit the back panel of her car, and it spun it out of control. And her car, as it spun out of control, just happened to slide into the median and hit the back of a dump truck that was parked in the median, that not only wasn't supposed to be in the median and was illegally parked there, but was the only obstacle for about 20 miles. Now, 1 second, or even half a second either way, it'd have been a different story. But as unfortunately, she died almost instantly, and as she laid there in her car dying at the scene of the accident, her coworker, who the call had been cut off on, was frantically calling and texting her as her phone lay among the wreckage. Again, nobody wakes up in the morning thinking about that. Nobody plans for these things to happen. Well, her phone was taken, and because there was obviously going to be some type of litigation, it was sealed. It was put in a safe deposit box shortly after her accident. And it took about 2.5 years. In fact, it was this last May that all the attorneys involved agreed on a protocol to look at her cell phone. Well, why do we want to look at her cell phone? Well, obviously, there's some thoughts that, we think was to blame for the accident, but of course, insurance companies being insurance companies, they want to know if there were things that she had done that contributed to the accident. Was she texting and driving? Was she distracted? Was she using apps? Was she doing those kind of things? Well, so lots of lawyers, and I work with lawyers a lot, spent months planning out a protocol, where we were going to meet, who was going to be there, who the opposing forensic expert was. I was working for the estate. And we were all going to get together in Louisiana, and we were going to conduct an inspection and copying of this phone to answer those questions. The problem was when the attorneys for the estate questioned the mother, not questioned the mother, questioned the family, the mother's family. Nobody knew the lock code for her phone. She was using a very new iPhone at the time. And unfortunately, contrary to popular culture, there's really not an efficient, economical, or reliable way to get into iPhones when they're locked. So I flew to Baton Rouge, Louisiana in May, and went into this room with another forensics guy and about 15 to 20 attorneys for the formality of charging up her phone and verifying that the few passcodes that we thought might work that her family provided, things like her kid's birthday, her anniversary, things like that, to verify that those wouldn't work. And then we would all, get back in our cars, get back on our planes, and that would be the end of it, leaving the question of whether she was somehow culpable in her own death unanswered, because at that point there wouldn't be anything we could do. So of course we plug it in, the little battery icon comes up, we sit there, and it was probably about the longest 10 to 15 minutes just sitting there watching, waiting, helpless. And when it finally charged up enough, the phone actually opened up. And this is actually a picture of the phone. She did not have a lock code on her phone. Her last gift to her family, in a weird sort of way, was the fact that she didn't have a passcode on her phone. Okay. So what did that do for me? Well, first of all, that allowed me to conduct the inspection of the phone. I was able to determine that while, yes, she was on the phone at the time, and her coworker had testified to such and to the conversation, and unfortunately it was a conversation that will haunt him for the rest of his life because he heard something, he knew something bad had happened, but we were able to determine that while she was on her phone at the time, she was not texting, she was not using apps, and I was able to confirm from the data on the phone that she had her phone connected to the hands-free system of the Mercedes at the time, the Bluetooth system. So she was doing it completely legal and doing it completely right, and that helped to I guess get rid of the insurance company's last objections to any type of settlement, and they did actually get the case settled in favor of the state shortly after that. The other thing that it gave me was the opportunity for the family to recover all of her pictures, all of her videos, pictures that she'd still had that she took at her daughter's wedding that nobody else had seen. One of the other things that was cool but heartbreaking at the same time was she was one of those people that did a lot of voice memos. So she would do voice memos and send them to people. Like she'd do a voice memo to a coworker, hey, you did a great job today, good job on that, you're doing awesome. Or, a message to her kid, voice memo, you're wonderful, you're gonna do great at school today, or you're gonna do great at college, those kind of things. And to recover all those and provide them to the family was something that was very special to me. And that's a situation I get into. So first of all, I tell you that story to kind of illustrate why I sort of have the ability to come up here and talk about this subject to you. It's something that we do a lot. In my line of work, especially with the opioid crisis, with things like that, I get involved in a lot of wrongful death cases. I get involved in a lot of cases where we don't know whether it's suicide, whether it's some type of foul play or whatever. And we're either trying to get answers for law enforcement or we're just trying to get some kind of closure for the family. And sometimes we're lucky, and sometimes we're not. And so that's part of what we're going to talk about today, is thinking about those things, being prepared for them, and how they can possibly affect you and your family, and things that you can do to take care of it. But not just the specific what you can do to make sure your data is accessible, but also just thinking in terms of kind of the larger, bigger picture. So some things we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about what is a digital legacy, so that we're kind of on the same page with what I'm talking about. Sort of an idea of what happens when I die, because a lot of times we don't think about, no matter who we are, the mess we leave behind for other people to take care of. So what can I do to make it easier on my friends and family who are going to try to take care of my stuff? What should I do? Some good rules of thumb if you're in that position where you need to try to collect or capture or deal with somebody's electronic footprint. And then we're going to talk about long-term digital footprints. We're going to talk about how we fit in the timeline of history and what we're doing to preserve the electronic record of what we're here about. And on that vein, I've got a short video that I want to play for you guys that we'll talk about. Oops, sorry, if I don't click twice.
All right, so let's take 4 subjects that obviously go together: big data, tattoos, immortality, and the Greeks, right? And the issue about tattoos is that without a word, tattoos really do shout. So you don't have to say a lot. And tattoos tell you a lot of stories. If I can ask an indiscreet question, how many of you have tattoos? A few, but not most. What happens if Facebook, Google, Twitter, LinkedIn, cell phones, GPS, Foursquare, Yelp, Travel Advisor, all these things you deal with every day turn out to be electronic tattoos? And what if they provide as much information about who and what you are as any tattoo ever would? What's ended up happening over the past few decades is the kind of coverage that you had as a head of state or as a great celebrity is now being applied to you every day by all these people who are tweeting, blogging, following you, watching your credit scores, and what you do to yourself. And electronic tattoos also shout. And as you're thinking of the consequences of that, it's getting really hard to hide from this stuff, among other things, because it's not just the electronic tattoos, it's facial recognition that's getting really good. So you can take a picture with an iPhone and get all the names. Although, again, sometimes it does make mistakes. But that means you can take a typical bar scene like this, take a picture, say, of this guy right here, get the name, and download all the records before you utter a word or speak to somebody, because everybody turns out to be absolutely plastered by electronic tattoos. And so there's companies like Face.com that now have about 18 billion faces online. Here's what happened to this company. There are other companies that will place a camera like this. This has nothing to do with Facebook. They take your picture, they tie it to the social media, they figure out you really like to wear black dresses. So maybe the person in the store comes up and says, hey, we've got 5 black dresses that would just look great on you. So what if Andy was wrong? Here's Andy's theory. What if we flip this? What if you're only going to be anonymous for 15 minutes? Well, then, because of electronic tattoos, maybe all of you and all of us are very close to immortality, because these tattoos will live far longer than our bodies will. And if that's true, then what we want to do is we want to go through 4 lessons from the Greeks and 1 lesson from Latin American. Why the Greeks? Well, the Greeks thought about what happens when gods and humans and immortality mix for a long time. So lesson number 1, Sisyphus. Remember, did a horrible thing, condemned for all time to roll this rock up, it would roll back down, roll back up, roll back down. It's a little like your reputation. Once you get that electronic tattoo, you're going to be rolling up and down for a long time. So as you go through this stuff, just be careful what you post. Myth number 2, Orpheus. Wonderful guy, charming to be around, great partier, great singer, loses his beloved, charms his way into the underworld, only person to charm his way into the underworld, charms the gods of the underworld, they release his beauty on the condition he never look at her until they're out. So he's walking out and walking out and walking out, and he just can't resist. He looks at her, loses her forever. With all this data out here, it might be a good idea not to look too far into the past of those you love. Lesson number 3, Atalanta. Greatest runner. She would challenge anybody. If you won, she would marry you. If you lost, you died. How did Hippomenes beat her? Well, he had all these wonderful little golden apples, and she'd run ahead and he'd roll a little golden apple. She'd run ahead, he'd roll a little golden apple. She kept getting distracted. He eventually won the race. Just remember the purpose is all these little golden apples come and reach you, and you want to post about them or tweet about them or send a late message. And then, of course, there's Narcissus. Nobody here would ever be accused or be familiar with Narcissus. But as you're thinking about Narcissus, just don't fall in love with your own reflection. Last, a lesson from a Latin American. This is the great poet Jorge Luis Borges. When he was threatened by the thugs of the Argentine military junta, he came back and said, "Oh, come on, how else can you threaten other than with death?" The interesting thing, the original thing, would be to threaten somebody with immortality. And that, of course, is what we are all now threatened with today because of electronic tattoos. Thank you.
Thank you for indulging me with that video. It's one that it's been around for a while, and I really like it because I think it encapsulates far better than I could this idea of the image that you create being out there forever. And of course, that's kind of a whole separate story that we could talk about some other time about the persistence of data. But when we accept that we have a digital legacy and that our information and the fact that we are here is part of a larger chain of history, then we want to think about in terms of preserving it for good and bad. Every stupid thing we've ever done, there may be a record of. But all the good things, all the contributions, the fact that we were even here is something that we want to think about and make sure. So when we talk about a digital legacy, what are we kind of talking about? And I know we're on the same page with, when we talk about social media, we know we're talking about Facebook, we're talking about Twitter, Instagram, things like that. Sometimes we don't think in terms of other things that can also fall into that category. Maybe websites that you've created or electronic art, things like that you've done. Your email accounts. Your email accounts are now kind of considered your personal paper, personal papers. Back in the old days, how do we know a lot about what happened in the lives of regular people in, say, the Revolutionary War or the Civil War, things like that, through the letters that they wrote? It's actually interesting. There was a historian that wrote a book about everyday life among the Romans and Greeks because nobody ever talked about everyday life of the Romans and Greeks. If you were a famous person, then a lot of people wrote about you. So the way that we know about everyday people was from the paper that they left behind. And if our generation doesn't leave any paper behind, then how do they know about us? Let me ask this. When was the last time anyone here saved a newspaper? Think about that. What would you know what the event was? For most people, when you ask that question or when you see polls and stuff, it was September 11th. September 11th was an interesting time where it kind of marked, because of the events surrounding it, it was actually a boon and an explosion of online news. Because things were happening so quickly, people turned to the 24-hour always-on news sources as opposed to the traditional 6 p.m. or 11 p.m. or newspaper news sources. And so that was kind of an interesting transition, but it was also the last time that people wholesale kind of saved newspapers. I have newspapers from Pearl Harbor. I have newspapers, and no, I'm not that old for the person who just gave me that look, or the moon landing that my parents saved. But the fact that, I have all these newspapers from stuff that happened 50 years ago and have no newspapers from things that happened in the last 20 years. It's kind of interesting. We talk about coin wallets. There are a lot of people who come to us because they're interested in getting their loved ones' pictures or the loved ones' emails. And there are a lot of people who come to us because they want the Bitcoin wallets. That is a reality. Think about your Steam library. I know there is probably a lot of people at DragonCon whose Steam libraries are probably way more valuable than a typical Bitcoin library, and you've got a lot more invested in it. And I would say if there's a way to will somebody your Steam library, I think that should happen. But we also, when we're talking about your legacy and your footprint, even things as simple as power bills and car payments, right? Think about that. Think about if something happened to you, your family or your people are going to need a way to just even do the simple things like pay the power bill. If you're the one who always pays the power bill with an online account, maybe that's just an added headache for somebody else. So that's just kind of giving you an idea of what we're talking about. Now, the good news is that over the last couple of years, there have been a lot of attention paid to this idea of a digital legacy. And there's some websites out here. I just showed this in another page from some documents they make. It's the Digital Legacy Association. And they're starting to push people to think in terms of what we're going to talk about and what we're talking about today, the same way you talk about living wills and talk about your estate. Kind of have a plan for what's going to happen to your electronic tangible assets and to also your footprint and how to handle that. And so again, as we go through here over the next few minutes, we're going to talk about some of those things. But I don't expect you to remember all of this other than to remember that this is an issue and to kind of do your own research and looking that there are resources out there. Here's another thing just talking about a way to plan out for what happens to your digital data. So what happens when you die? So let's just imagine that you're not here, and somebody else is going to have to figure out what to do. Well, because everything nowadays is electronic, we have such little printed paper. What are we talking about? Well, it kind of goes into a couple categories. We talk about estate data. So whoever's got to handle your stuff, and it doesn't matter whether you have a family or a spouse or a close friend. If you're gone, somebody's going to have to take care of it. They can't just. It's going to be work for somebody, no matter what, whether you want it or not. Somebody's going to have to deal with it, and it falls into a couple categories. Of course, bills and bank accounts. Now, for most of us, all of our banking is online. We probably even have. We all get the electronic statements, perhaps. So it's not like we even have a paper checkbook anymore. In fact, very few of us have paper checkbooks. Most of us have, some type of online account. But let's think about if somebody had to recreate your footprint and your family. So you got your bank account. Well, they know you bank at First Citizens or BB&T or something like that. But do they know about other accounts that you have where you store stuff in? Do they know about trading accounts? Do they know about the coin wallets that we talk about? Do they know about those things that you may have value in? So making sure that you have a way to let them know that, to document that is important, just the same way that you would want them to know your bank accounts. Obviously, a lot of people don't have written paper wills anymore. And in fact, a staggering amount of people don't have wills at all. And a lot of times, if your family is trying to reconstruct what your wishes may be, do you want to be cremated? Do you want to, be stuck in the woods with a tree planted in you, or whatever your wishes are? A lot of times, if you haven't specifically told people your wishes, they're going to have to go back through and try to discern that from, they're going to look at your web history and see if you were a druid or something. They're going to have to figure those things out. Also, a lot of times, too, when someone, does die unexpectedly, and that's always a weird way to say it, because I would hope that we all, death is expected, but at the same time, I hope for all of us it would be unexpected. there's always that question, no matter what happens, they want answers. And, I've been involved in cases where it was an overdose, but, it might be murder. There were cases where it was murder, or we believed it was murder, and the police claimed it was an overdose. There's one on Dateline called The Crossings. You can Google that one later, that we were involved in. But the idea is that getting access to that information can be what helps your family move past it, because sometimes when things happen and there's no reason for it, there's no explanation, and we're in Skeptrack, so we don't buy that everything happens for a reason. We're not the ones who buy that there's a plan. Okay, so sometimes that's even worse for us, because we can't take comfort in the fact that when a bad thing happens to a family or a loved one, that it was a plan. So we want some type of explanation. We want to be scientists, and so we want to answer that. And then finally, having access to family pictures. And we get a lot of people who contact us because maybe a relative before they died left them a voicemail message, and they deleted the voicemail message, and then they realized that they wanted that copy of the person's voice. They wanted to have it and save it, things like that. And again, that can help provide closure. Another thing that happens is if you do have your phone or things like that they can't access, and they have unanswered questions, they can't move forward like you would want them to do if they can't access that information. It might have been a simple accident, but until they've looked under every stone they can, they don't know that. We've had a lot of parents whose children have died from opioid overdoses or stuff, and when there's still some possibility that there's some other answer, it stays with them. It kind of torments them until they can get that closure. Obviously, social media data. So what happens to that? Well, that's an interesting thing. First of all, there's kind of a debate about who owns that stuff. Some account places like Facebook and stuff, they do have a mechanism for that. For example, Facebook will do something called memorialize an account, which is you can contact them and give them information to know that somebody's passed away. What they will do is the account will stay up. People can make comments and stuff, but there's no more posts to the account, that kind of thing. So everyone has mechanisms for that. I would say that's one of the unfortunate realities of the fact that we do so much with social media, is that unfortunately there are times where people get notified about a person they care about's death through Facebook, and that's really a horrible way to find that out. If you are close enough to somebody that you have kind of control over that, obviously you can't control what other people post, but it's always not a good idea to let the world know that somebody passed away that way. We also talk about value accounts, so think about that too. Think about what you may have. I'm kind of saying Steam with a little bit of humor as far as your Steam account. But let's face it, if it has value and you want your family to have that, then you need to make sure that you're not the only one that can access it. And we're going to talk about ways to make sure that happens. But things like Bitcoin, heck, think about how much money you've probably got invested in an iTunes account. And if you can't give somebody your CD collection nowadays, let them have your iTunes. And then there's what we talk about, legacy data. The stuff that kind of showed you were here, the sum total of your collective and creative experience, your documents, letters you've written, stories you've written, pictures that you've taken, your art. Think about how much of that is digital, and maybe some of it's in places that your friends and family couldn't find. Do you have Instagram accounts and stuff like that people would want to get a hold of? So that's kind of what we're talking about. Those are the kind of things that people would want access to or need access to if something happened to you. So what are some things you can do to help them? I am arguably probably one of the top experts in the country on cell phone security, and I don't have a lock code on my phone for several reasons. One, admittedly, because I'm kind of lazy and it takes a little bit longer when I want to get to my phone. But I also realize that if anything happened to me, that the people that I work with and my family and stuff would need access to my information, and I can't trust them to know and remember my lock code even if I swear I've told them 100 times, because in an emotional situation or a traumatic situation like that, you can't expect your family members to remember that. I don't have a lock code on my phone. My phone is with me everywhere. Worst case scenario, I lose it. Well, if I've lost my phone and I have a lock code on it, then whoever finds it, if they are benevolent enough to try to return it, isn't going to really have a good idea of who I am. Though if it comes down to it, if you do find a phone and it is locked, see if you can pop the, if it has a battery, pop the battery out, and there's an IMEI number on the back, and you can call the carrier and give them that. Or if it's an iPhone, there's that little tiny tray that you can take a little pin and pop out, and it has the serial number of the phone, and the carrier will help you find that. But
I did one fun thing on my phone. On the lock screen,
Mhm.
I put, if found, please return to so-and-so.
And that is a great idea. What she said was that she put a note on there that if found, return to. That is a good idea, and that would help you if your phone gets locked. Also, like iPhones and stuff have that Find My Phone feature where you can put a message on the screen. But I know a lot of people are going to think it's kind of self-serving because I get into people's phones and look at their data for a living. But at the same time, just think about that. That's a judgment. If I will say this, and I told Derek that this was the thesis sentence of my presentation, which is if you die and something happens to you, the last thing in the world your friends and family are going to care about is your porn history. That's really not what they're going to be going through your stuff for and what they need. So I'm of the opinion of either just don't do it, don't worry about it, because your phone is going to be with you most of the time anyway, or have a lock code password buddy, and we're going to talk. That's going to be a reoccurring theme. Have somebody that you share that information with, and if you're going to share it with them, put it in an email or whatever. Obviously, we're worried about hackers, we're worried about security, and there's plenty of things you can do to make sure your accounts are secure, like two-step authentication and stuff, but you want to make sure that those people have a way to get in if they need to. So, again, keep it simple as far as lock codes go. Keep it simple as far as passwords and encryption. Don't make it harder on people. If you have a laptop and it has the family pictures on it, if you enable encryption and nobody has your password, those things are gone forever. If you have a password on it and encryption is not turned on, then all that data can still be gotten by somebody with just a little bit more effort than what a regular person would put into. So again, keep it simple. Keep a single email address. For most people, that's a Gmail address or something. Your email address is kind of like your Holy Grail. It's kind of like the Lord of the Rings one that, the ring to rule them all. And if we're trying to recover somebody's information who has passed away, one of the first things that we want to do is get into your email account. If we can access your email account, then we can access your bank accounts. We can access your mortgage, your car loan, all those other things that your email addresses tie to. But if you want to keep your account secure, but yet make sure that somebody else can access it, for example, a Gmail account, make sure that you've set password reset options. Now, if you've had a Gmail account for 5, 6, 10 years, you may not have ever been required to do that. It may have been an option. If you create a new Gmail account now, they'll make you do that. So think about that. Think about how somebody would get into your email account that should. And you can even add trusted phone numbers. You can add a friend of yours number to the trusted number where they would get a passcode if they needed to get into your account. By all means, make sure that if you have emails related to accounts, go ahead and save them. You got plenty of room in your email account in Gmail. So that way, if a loved one does have to go through your email, they know you've got a Dropbox account. Maybe that's where important things are, Steam, PayPal, things like that. And then also, just remember that there may be data that you have that could be important for people who you work with, your employees or your coworkers or stuff like that. So locking your stuff down too much could prevent business continuity. There have been many businesses that have gone out of business because somebody in a position of authority, especially small businesses, died and they were the only ones who knew stuff and nobody else could get into the stuff. So try to keep that in mind when you do these kind of things. What can we do to help them? Again, There are things like inactive account notifications. So Gmail actually has another feature, and it's called inactive account notification. And what it is you can set your Gmail account to where if you don't log in a period that you specify, 30 days, 90 days, whatever, that somebody else, there's an email that will go to somebody else, and that person will be given a link to access your account, which is an amazing thing. You can set it up. You still don't want to rely on that, and also the inactive account notification thing, if it's 30 days, that's probably way past when anybody would actually need to have your stuff. It's a good thing to have, but it's not a substitute for making sure people can get in there. All right, so here's the big one. Put a friend or family member on your cell phone account as an authorized user. That is really important, because here's what it comes down to. Why the phone is so important is if we can get into your phone, we can get into everything else. And I know I sound like a hacker, but remember, we're talking about doing this to help your friends and your family. In most cases, if we can get the phone unlocked or it doesn't have a passcode, we can reset the Gmail by sending a code to the phone. We can reset the iCloud. We can reset all the banking. A lot of them have codes and stuff like that. We can do that. If we can't get into the phone, okay, because it's irretrievably locked, what we can do is your friends or family can log into your phone account, and they can take another phone and put your phone number on that phone and then get all those text messages. So that is a way that can be done, as long as, they don't have to jump through a lot of crazy hoops. If your spouse is already on your phone account, that's great. But you also have to think in terms of what happens to you and your spouse. That's why it's kind of always good to have a outside the family friend that you trust, and you can make it a quid pro quo thing. You can have a password buddy. And then the main thing, and we always say this about everything, talk to your friends and family about what you want to happen. Do you want your Facebook account completely deleted when you go away, or do you want it memorialized and stuff like that? For the record, okay, throw out a date. When are there going to be more dead people on Facebook than live people? I don't know if this is correct or not, but the statistic I saw was that by 2098, there will be more dead people than live people on Facebook. That's apparently the Facebook tipping point. I think, yeah, and that's a whole nother session. Exactly. But think about that. Think about all the people and all the accounts and stuff like that. All right. So now let's put ourselves in that position. So, all right. So here we do. So unfortunately, the worst has happened. A friend or family member has died suddenly and unexpectedly. What are some things we can do? All right. Now, I'm going to say, first of all, that these are all hypothetical suggestions, and if I encourage you to do anything that could be considered breaking the law, I plead forgiveness versus permission, okay? Because in a lot of cases, the people who control the accounts, again, the Gmails, the Yahoos, things like that, their position would be that the account only belongs to the account holder, and anything that we do, even if the person is dead and you control the estate, might still be, out of bounds. Now, nobody has ever gone to jail or gotten in trouble for this. And I would say that Gmail and Yahoo have been sued many, many times, especially after during the Gulf War, when a lot of servicemen were dying overseas, and their families would want to get into their Yahoo and Gmail accounts, and they would actually have to sue Yahoo and Gmail for access to those accounts to get what we all consider, based on our conversation we're having today, to be that person's personal effects and personal papers, just like you would have somebody's personal papers after they die. All right, so if that happens, do work as quickly as you can to try to get into the accounts, to try to take stock of what is there and what's not there and access them, because there's two things you're going to run into. One, some accounts may get harder to get into the longer they have been inactive. The longer that someone has gone without logging into an account, then there may be more security questions or things that you have to do. But here's what I will tell you. If you think you know a password, or you think you have account credentials, and it doesn't work after one or two tries, don't try to brute force the password. You're better off trying to reset a password than you are trying to guess a password. Because if you try too many times and you lock the account up, then you may just have locked it up and you'll never have the authority to get back into it. There's too many hoops. But take that second step and see what your password reset options are. And it could be as simple as a text message to the phone. And in fact, in a lot of cases with Android phones and iPhones, the code that you need to get into the email account will pop up on the screen as a notification even if the phone is locked. Okay, so again, 1 or 2 password attempts, don't keep trying, look at the resets. We said start with the main email account and work your way outward. Try to get into the whatever their main email account is and hope that that's where things like online banking. For example, don't lock up the online banking account trying to get into that, because the security on that may be a lot higher than what you can do easily. Get into the email account and then just have a password reset link sent. And like I said before, if you can't get into a phone or something like that, transfer the number to a new phone. Save the old phone. And that's the other thing too, is that if you can't get into it now, maybe 5 years from now we can. Don't give up on it. Put it in a drawer. At least maybe there's some information we can recover later. We have had situations like that where we have held on to phones for years, and then an exploit has been found or technology to allow us to get into it. And that's a really cool but also weird conversation when you call somebody a couple years down the line and say, hey, I can get into the phone. Do you still want me to? And everybody always says yes, of course. But anyway. So again, we said be sensitive to how to handle social media accounts. The problem with going in and deleting a Facebook account immediately, if you have that authority or power, could be that there's a lot of people on the friends list who won't know what happened. They might not know that the person passed away, or they might think they just got defriended, or they might think that they got defriended and then the person passed away, which is also kind of not cool. But also, again, as much as you can preserve it, because you also don't know what might be important later if you can. But ultimately, at some point, it is okay to take those things down, to turn off that email account. And that's one of the things that when we deal with people who have lost somebody and they're having to deal with their footprint, it's like, there comes a point where it's okay to shut down their email account. I know it's painful and I know it's a big step, but sometimes that's what you have to do to move forward. And again, don't be afraid to get help, to get technical help. Unfortunately, the Gmails and the Apples and the people like that aren't necessarily going to be the ones that can help you, but there are people like me, and actually just there may be computer people who have a better idea about it than you do, so don't be afraid to ask them for help. And we're going to have time for some questions here in a little bit, but now getting to kind of the last part. So this is kind of interesting. So these are some pictures of, and my 15-year-old daughter is here, and so these are great grandparents and stuff like that. So these are some pictures from the 20s, the 30s, and in my house I have like boxes of pictures from 20 plus years ago, right? And those are still going to be sitting in my house. And unfortunately, they're going to be sitting in my house for my daughter to have to deal with someday. She's going to have to clean them all out. And she will, of course, get to make the decision whether to keep them or not. Now, I have digitized most of them, but the point is they're there. They're in a paper format. If I leave them in those boxes and there's nothing like a fire or something, they will still be there. But think about this from your perspective, because we all have those. We all have those old photo albums and stuff. But how many pictures do you have from the last 20 years or the last 10 years? Is there like this black hole of this data for you that you actually don't have in a tangible format, right? And if something were to happen to you and you either haven't backed up this data or you have and nobody knows where it is, then not only is it gone, but you've kind of placed a big hole in the legacy. One of the things that's heartbreaking for me is when people will bring me their electronic devices or their phones that have crashed, and they've got all of their, every kid's soccer game and middle school graduation and birth and all these things, and they have, a decade of electronic memories, that they're the stewards of for their children, and then something has happened and those are gone forever. And sometimes they are gone forever. It's heartbreaking. So the first question is now that we know it's digital, what can we do and take some steps? So let's think about this. So now let's think in terms of two things. One, it's not just about having a backup copy of your electronic data, right? And cloud services are great, but that may not necessarily be the answer. We want some kind of physical medium. So just randomly, we have like tape backups, flash drives, CDs and stuff. What would you think would be the best way to store some data long term if you were going to stick it on a shelf or in a fire safe or whatever? Any guesses? Paper is good. Paper is good, and we talked about that. So I'll give you credit for paper, but that wasn't necessarily the answers I'm looking for, but that's okay. I'll give you some pros and cons with everything we have here. Like, first of all, we have CDs. Well, CDs typically are only supposed to have a shelf life of about 10 years. Now, I know a lot of us probably have CDs that we bought 20 plus years ago. You will find that the music CDs that you bought will probably last a lot longer and be more reliable than the ones that you might have burned yourself to store data on. CDs aren't really considered that reliable, and they can be damaged very easily. Now, there is a type of CD that is really, really expensive and consumers can't use it, but it is rated for up to 1,000 years of life. Yeah, but that's not what we can use. The VHS tapes that everybody was using in the 90s, that you may have a lot of family movies on, you need to go ahead and start digitizing those like yesterday. Those didn't have a very long shelf life at all, and the problem with tape is that over time the tape actually turns into more of a glue. And so please, if you have VHS tapes of stuff, it's very easy to do it. There's bureaus you can send them to, or you can buy like little USB adapters to plug into the VCRs and stuff. So VHS tape definitely out. The tape in the bottom, I guess right or left, my left, your right, whatever. That's what we call LTO tape. That's the kind of stuff that corporations use. That's another good maybe 10 years or so. The problem with those is that there's different software that can be used to do it, different hardware that can be used to do it. So if you had that sitting on a shelf in your fire safe, your family wouldn't really know what to do with that, or your grandkids. Flash drives and SSD drives, anything that's a solid state drive, those, not only are those not reliable for long-term storage, those are not good for short-term storage without backups. There is no data recovery for flash drives. If you have a flash drive and it dies, you're out of luck. Same thing with SSD drives. Part of the problem with them long-term, and I'm kind of talking fast because I got a couple more things to throw at you. Part of the problem long-term is that the circuit boards are kind of, and transistors are basically crystals, and they continue to grow. And over time, they will grow and short out. So anything that relies on that type of storage is not good. Right now, for consumers, the best option and the best cheapest option would be platter hard drives, spinning hard drives. And these things are cheap. You can get like a 4 terabyte drive for less than $100 on Amazon. The idea is these things do have decades of shelf life, 20, 30 years. And obviously, these are estimates based on testing because we haven't had them that long. But if you look at the picture of the little silver platters, that's what a regular hard drive looks like when it's opened. And it's kind of like a record player. You have a stack of platters that stores the information, and you have a little record player type arm. Well, when it's not reading data, that arm is out of the way and parked. So the data on those platters, would be accessible years from now, decades from now. And if the mechanical parts fail, it's not a difficult process, and it still would not be a difficult process 100 years from now for them to actually replace the hardware and still access the platters. Those platters are really secure. And again, you're talking about something about the size of a pack of cigarettes. So what do you want to do with those things? Well, some good tips for when you're storing this data and your family's data and stuff. If this means something to you, then that's cool. Standard format, don't get funky. You might like Linux, you might like some other kind of thing. You might be one of these guys still using OS2 from IBM or something. Put it in the standard format that's going to be around for a while. Do not encrypt the data. Do not password protect it. Do not encrypt it. Because what are you going to do? You're going to put the password on a sticky note on the hard drive. If the data is encrypted and the password's gone, the data's gone. Okay. Use standard file formats. If whatever the camera on your phone took it in this format, leave it in that format. Keep it all standardized. Don't use third-party backup software. Just copy it over to the drive. Because again, 4 years from now, 10 years from now, 100 years from now, you don't want people to have to go looking for that information. So save them in that format. Don't zip it if you can help it, but if you're going to compress it, only use zip files. I like putting labels on hard drives. It doesn't do you any good to have all of your kids' entire life of family pictures on a hard drive in a fire safe, and nobody knows that that's what that is. So obviously label it, but I'm also a fan of labeling the drive with like either a Sharpie or a paint pen, that says like family pictures don't delete or something like that. Because you don't know, labels dry, peel, disappear. And of course, a dry and climate controlled place. Make sure that it's somewhere safe. And we've done a lot of stuff with recovering. Platter hard drives are extremely resilient. We've gotten data off of them in fires, floods, electrical shorts, and stuff like that. Also, multiple copies. One of the things that I do is, so I make the backup of all the pictures and stuff, and every year I kind of make another backup of that year, and put, so I keep like on my computer I have all the family pictures, and every year I dump everything to a hard drive and stick it in the safe, so I have multiple years that overlap, but I also make a copy and give it to grandma and grandpa to save in their safe deposit box at their house, and they know that's what that is. So do that. Make sure if you do a will or something that you mention in your will that you have that. That, hey, and by the way, I want my daughter to have the hard drives of the family pictures, and here's where they are, and this is what it looks like. Just make sure they know they're there. Again, we talked about scanning the old images and adding them to the collections, bringing your old VHS tapes and CDs. The problem with cloud storage is what happens if you die and they don't know there's cloud storage and you miss a payment and they delete your account. So that's one of the problems with that. There are some places where you can buy lifetime cloud storage. You pay them like $200 and you get like a terabyte forever. But how many people here are familiar with the Mega Upload thing in Kim.com from a couple years ago? Mega Upload was like the Dropbox of 2010 or 2012. And not only was it a place where a lot of pirates and stuff would keep their stuff and download music. So there was a lot of piracy there. Your downloaded software and music and stuff like that. But there were a lot of companies and families that used that data storage for their own important stuff. And the FBI went in, seized all the servers, took everything, and those people never got their data. In most cases, never got their data back. Some companies who had the resources could sue for it, but your family's not going to be able to sue Dropbox if they go out of business. So finally, what we've talked about today, your digital legacy is important. You're part of history, and you were here, and you whether you think so or not, you added something and you made the world better. And think about this. Think about how cool it would be to go back and see your great-great-grandparents in full color HD and how they lived their lives back in the 30s and 40s, right? I mean, I'm jealous of my daughter because she has her whole life. She doesn't think it's that great right now, but it's in HD, right? Because, I was recording and filming, and I was that parent, right? And so she has that. And in a way, I'm kind of jealous because I have very little of that from my childhood. I've got some pictures, maybe some grainy films. But our kids today, their whole life is going to be in HD, as long as we can preserve that. So if we think how cool it would be to be able to go back and see our great-grandparents, and the stuff they did, and see it in full color HD with sound, well, remember, that's what our great-grandchildren are going to want. And so we kind of have an obligation to make sure that we're preserving our legacy for them. So again, make sure that whatever you can do to make your digital footprint easier for people to access if something happens to you. If you're dealing with an estate, then deal quickly. That is important too. There's a lot of things you have to deal with if you're dealing with that, but this is the kind of stuff that is going to be really important to you. So move quickly so that you don't lose that window. And with that, for the first time in several DragonCon talks I've given, there's time for questions. So by all means, please, what's your question?
What is a coin wallet and what is a Steam account?
Okay, Really quickly, a Steam account is where you can buy video games online, and so you don't actually have the physical discs, but they're stored. So basically you can log in from any computer and play your games. And people have thousands and thousands of games and a lot of value. And, like for example, if, my daughter shares my Steam account, and if something happened to me, she would never forgive me for her not being able to access the Steam account. And then the Bitcoin stuff is basically what we talk about, electronic currency, and sometimes that is stored in an electronic format. You may have a website you go to that stores all your Bitcoin, or you may have what's called a wallet. And basically electronic currency and Bitcoin is just a string of code. And so you have to store that string of code. If you lose that string of code, you've lost the money. One of the funny things about Bitcoin is there isn't a finite amount of Bitcoin out in the world. And as stupid things happen, like the FBI seizes it, or people's computer hard drives crash, or people have Bitcoin wallets and die, a lot of that Bitcoin's just gone forever. It just disappears. That value is gone. Any other questions? Yeah. Oh, microphone. Oh yeah, go to the microphone. That's awesome.
If you have power of attorney, and I'm thinking about this, my father-in-law is 99 years old, are you able to can you then go, say, to a bank where they have it all digitally and get the digital? I know they can do the paper stuff, but these things you were saying about not being able to access, does power of attorney change that aspect at all?
If you are, and I would say the answer is yes, having the power of attorney, but keeping in mind there's two aspects here. There is, if you are the estate and you have the power of attorney and you have all the paperwork and the death certificate, would you be able to go to a bank and get those records? Definitely, but that's going to take some time. What if you need to make sure the mortgage gets paid? What if you need to buy groceries? Things like that. And those are, I'm more concerned about the short-term considerations. So the long-term considerations, yes. Short-term, you want to make sure your family can make it the next day. There was a recent situation in North Carolina, you may have heard, where the guy was playing at the beach. He had 9 kids, 3 of his own and 6 adopted, he and his wife. His wife obviously stayed home, and I didn't mean that as a sexist way. It's like somebody's got to be taking care of all these kids. And he was playing in the surf, and a wave knocked him over, and he broke his neck and died. Okay. And part of the reason why I tell that story is that he had controlled everything. Not only was he the breadwinner, he paid all the bills, he did all this stuff. And so there is a GoFundMe out there. I think it's called the Dingle Family, so you can look that up. But it was also just a matter of having to try to figure out all that stuff, along with taking care of all these children and going and grieving and stuff like that. So, and if you have any other questions, go to the microphone. I will say one more thing. So thinking in terms of long-term data storage, this was fascinating to me. So let's think about, let's say we want to take information that we have, what we've collected. We've got the Declaration of Independence, we've got things like that. We want them to last for 100 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years. What are some ways we can store data that other cultures, maybe a civilization after us, maybe we put it on a spaceship and send it out to aliens and they see it. How can we store a lot of data that they can access? And the cool thing that they came up with on how to store data was, if you remember the old microfiche, where you would take images and you would shrink them down really small. And so they've come up with a way where you can take crystalline or quartz structures like blocks, and they basically take little tiny miniature images of pages of data and shrink them down so that any civilization, they don't need record players, they don't need CD players, they don't need computers. If they have gotten to the point of having a microscope, they can access the data. How awesome is that? So, one last question.
You mentioned working with the family to get the lady who passed away in the car accident to get her information. Any advice if a loved one passes away under not great circumstances on getting their phone back from the police ever?
Attorney or people like me, And it may be that you can't get the phone, but you can compel them to give you a copy. But that is something that we fight with all the time. And also, one quick plug, I actually have, because you've all been here today, you're all honorary Cyber Ninjas. So if you would like either a sticker or a button, you may have them, plus my card. And if you have questions later, I always tell people that the trick is not getting me to come and talk. The trick is getting me to shut up, that I love talking about this stuff. So by all means, questions like that, email me. Maybe I can give you some good direction. And again, what I've hoped to do is this to be a starting point for you guys to think about it. Do your own research and just have this idea in your head. So again, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you.
You go out to the meet and greet, and then he can talk forever out there, and get your stickers so you can be a cyber ninja.
Yes.
Is there a site which has a checkoff list? I mean, I was taking pictures of what you have.
Well, one of the things I can do too is if you can contact me, ellington.net. You can find all about us. You can also email me, and I can send you the PowerPoint later. But also that Digital Legacy Association. So if you do a couple Google searches, you will find there are resources out there. It's just not something that we all think about, from one day to the next.